Hey, everybody. Welcome to More. We're glad that you joined us, whether that's in a circle with a group or whether it's around your table or your desk, and maybe you're by yourself and just wanting to study a little deeper. These are just times that we have in our heart. Our thought was to go a little bit deeper into the subject matter we talked about on Sunday. On Sunday, we covered a whole lot of things, a range of materials, and but the general idea was thinking about this matter of change and how much this change in us affects us and how it's very practical in that what the change that occurs in our heart becomes noticeable on the outside. It's not just something that happens on the inside, but what's on the inside literally affects the outside. And so we talked about it being noticeable at home. And I do believe that our faith, especially if it's a newfound faith, or maybe it's a maturity in faith, needs to progress and needs to become noticeable in the home. The biggest desire of my heart, frankly, is that my faith is seen in my home. I'm not really super excited about trying to impress you or the people that I stand in front of on Sunday, or the people who call me pastor or friend. I am concerned about my children and my wife. And I would love it if one day my wife and my children would be able to say at the end of this life, you know what? My dad's faith was real. It wasn't a put on. It wasn't something for Sunday. It was something that was noticeable in our home. And then it ought to be noticeable in the workplace, right? I mean, you ought to be the kind of employer that your employee dreams about. The one that doesn't cut the workday short, one that doesn't cheat or steal or including timesheets, right? Or time cards, but being honest and people of integrity. That's what Paul is saying. This change in us ought to bring that about. And the school, we talked about school for the students because they're not working jobs yet maybe, but they're this change of heart, this new passion, this new life in Christ ought to be noticeable at school. Your peers, your friends ought to be able to look at you and say, wow, there really is something different. There really is a change. And not be asking the question, can they really change? But should probably be saying, wow, they have really changed. So I hope you'll take some time thinking about that, maybe writing down some of your own thoughts about how you can let your faith be more noticeable at home, in the workplace, at school. And maybe you can talk about that if you're in a group particularly about the way those things happen. Now, we shared with you too how Paul addressed three groups: parents and children, husbands and wives, masters and servants. And we talked about something that they all had in common, and that is that one was coming from a place of authority and one was coming from a position of being under that authority. And we talked about the fact that in the Roman world, in Roman life for sure, the wife, the children were seen as the man's property. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's the biblical view. I said that's the Roman view. And in that world, that's what people thought. So Paul is introducing something to them that is counterintuitive to their culture and to their very nature. And that is that those who are in power should not seek to use those who are under their authority to their own advantage. And that's very, very important because some of us are in places of authority. And the very practical thought of this is we can't use that as a means to further ourselves at someone else's expense. Maybe that's why Jesus said that our first command is to love the Lord our God, and second is to love people, to love our neighbor as ourself. And the way we see people, our perspective of people, the filter that we see people through changes with this new life in Christ. And we no longer want to use them for our own advantage, but rather we want to use our position of advantage to lift them up and to encourage them. And on the other end of that, on the flip side of that, those of us who are under authority, because likely you are in authority in some areas and you are under authority in some areas. Those of us who find ourselves in a position of being under authority, how do we look at those who are in authority? Not with a rebellious heart, not with a heart of disdain, not with a heart of hatred or anger, but rather with a heart that says, you know what, this is where God placed me, and I'm going to live as He has asked me to live, faithfully, justly, and fairly. And so it's very important that we understand that this change in our life does affect us, even when we are under, and how we respond to someone who is in authority over us. And then we brought in the fact, or we talked a little bit about this whole issue of those who are born with privilege or have privilege or have gained privilege in one side or another. That's very important in our society today, and it's a big portion of what's happening in our culture today, and much debate is over this. There's a lot of debate, and some would say the Christians ought not to even enter into this debate, and why should we even be talking about it? And I'm talking about rights, privileges of those maybe that are gained because of who we're born to, or maybe because we are born into money, or maybe it's the color of our skin or the nationality that we have, or whatever it might be, our educational level, things that give us certain position or privilege and then can be abused and lead to abuse. And some would say, let's don't even go there, Pastor Eddie. Why do we even need to go there? I'll tell you why. Because it's not a political issue primarily, it's a spiritual issue. And we know that Jesus was not afraid to address any of these issues. Jesus was not afraid to go to the lowliest of the person. He was not afraid, nor did he use his authority or his rights or his power to the detriment of others, but rather he was bold enough to go to someone that no one else would go to, a Samaritan woman. What? Yeah. He was bold enough to protect children when his followers wanted to brush the children aside. He said, no, let the little children come to me. He said, children matter to me. And so I think we need to think through this thing and understand that it's a spiritual issue, not a political issue. But unfortunately, the political gravy train has hijacked our thinking on that and unfortunately have taken it to places there we don't need it to go. And now we feel like we can't speak to those issues. Well, why not? Why not? I'm not suggesting that we have to become political activists. I'm simply saying that we who are followers of Christ and know Christ must extend the grace that Christ has given us into the hearts and lives of others. So if you're in a group tonight, and I know most of you are, if you're in a group tonight, then there's some good questions to just sit around and talk about a little bit and approach this matter, approach this subject. And boy, I'd be glad to hear from you anytime. Thanks again for being a part of that small group. Or if you're on your own, dig into them, find somebody to talk to, find somebody to discuss this with, or maybe just pray and let it sink in for a while, and when God stirs you or moves you to that place, you can act further. So, thanks again for joining us, and God bless you. We'll see you Sunday for the last installment of our study of Colossians. God bless you.